You are welcome once again. My name is Emmanuel Odrojuma, your trainer for this entire series. If you have not subscribed to this channel, subscribe to it. Turn on the notification button to get alerted when a new video is posted. If you like this video, hit on the like button. This lesson will focus on one of the properties of Flexbox called justify content. Now, this property is also a property that is applied on the container and not the items themselves. So don't apply this particular property to the items directly, but rather to the containers. The justify content property can have one of these values: flex start, flex end, center, space around, space between, space evenly. So we first look at how it will visually affect the items when it is given to the container. But how it affects the items is also based on the flex direction. So if you have the flex direction to be on a row, how the justify content property will affect the items would be different from if the flex direction is set to column. So in this particular lesson, you concentrate on if the flex direction is set to a row. So if it is set to a row, these are how it will visually affect the items inside the container. So one thing we have to know is that the justify content arranges the items across the main axis. The next property we talk about will teach how the items are also arranged across the cross axis. But for the justify content, it arranges the items across the main axis. So if you give it a justify content of flex start and the flex direction is on a row, it will put the items at the beginning of the main axis, which is from left to right, at the beginning of the main axis. If you give it a justify content of flex end, it will put it at the end of the main axis. The difference between the flex end and the row reverse is that for the row reverse, when it puts the item at the end of the main axis, it will rearrange the items to move from right to left. But for the justify content with the flex end value, it will put the items at the end of the main axis, but won't rearrange the items from right to left. It will still move from left to right. The justify content with the value of center will also put the items in the middle of the main axis. When it is the flex start, you see that when the items are arranged at the left hand side, there is some space at the right hand side doing nothing. When it is at flex end, the items are put at the end and there is a space at the left hand side doing nothing. When it is put at center, the items are placed in the middle and there are spaces at both the left and then the right. But if you want the spaces to be distributed across the main axis, then you think about using either the space between, the space evenly, or the space around. So if you use the space between, it will divide the space left in between the items, but from the beginning and at the end, there will be no space at the beginning and at the end. The space will only be divided in between the items. When you give it a space evenly, the space left will be shared among the items. So the beginning will have a space, between 1 and 2 will have a space, 2 and 3 will have a space, and at the end will have a space. But what is special about this is the spaces will be divided evenly. So if it is 20 pixels over here, it will be 20 pixels between here, 20 pixels, 20 pixels. But for the space around, even though there will be a space at the beginning and in between the items and at the end of the items. The space at the beginning and the space at the end is mostly half of the spaces between the items. So the spaces between the items will be bigger than the spaces at the beginning and at the end. So that is how the justify content visually affects our items. Let's move to our code and see what effect it gives to our HTML page. So what I'm going to do is to lay out the navigation bar with justify content. So right now this is where we got to from our previous lesson, and our navigation bar looks clumsy at the left hand side. So what I want to do is to keep the text, the alchemist at the left, the links themselves in the middle, and the contact me at the right hand side. So when I look at my HTML code, see that for the navigation bar, I have the first item as that particular paragraph, the alchemist. I have the entire list as the second item, and the button as the third item. I've already made the navigation bar a Flexbox container. So I'll head back to my CSS, and I give it a class of navbar. So I'll come to the navbar class and give it a justify content. So by default it is at flex start. I can give it a flex end. Save it, and it moves to the end of my container. So if I decide to give it center, then all the three items are centered within the middle of my navigation bar. Now if I decide to give it a space between and save it, you see that the alchemist is at the left hand side, the entire list is in the middle, and then the button is at the right hand side, but there are no spaces at the beginning and at the end of this particular navigation bar. But if I give it a space evenly and save it, realize that the space over here is the same as the space between here, the space here, and then the space here. So that is for the space evenly. If I give it a space around and save it, realize that the space here and then the space between the items are bigger than the space at the beginning and then the space at the end. So use which one at any point in time that you want. I'll give you a bonus property called the gap property. You see that the items over here are still clumsy. So if I want to give them a space, then I can come to that class, which is the nav links, and give it a gap property, of, let's say, 20 pixels. Save it, and you see that there are spaces within those particular lengths. So the gap property can also be given to give spaces in between the items.